Hello and welcome to this demo of version 1 of the Pragmatic Auto-Translator. I'm giving this demo because we're getting ready to work on the development of version 2 of the Auto-Translator. And so it's important to understand the baseline that we have that we're going to be building upon in version 2. So what you're seeing on screen here is version 1 of the web application, where we can select from between the two languages that we have available as source languages. Um, we can input source text and then click Translate with Context. The system searches for similar context from our corpora and then displays the similar context that's being passed to the translation model along with the source text for translation here. And then the translation eventually appears here as well. So what happens when I reload the page, we're going to see a series of messages appear where the system is initializing. And what's essentially happening during this period is that we've got the JavaScript code behind the scenes. The system is currently in a client-side iteration, so all operations happen on the client side. What happens when we open up the page is that the items that we have in the corpus, the vectors that we have of our corpora, are automatically loaded into the browser. The system also checks that we are connected to the model that we're using to create vectors. That model is Gina embedding v3. And then it's telling us that it's ready to do translation. So we're now ready to input some source text and run the translation process. I've got some sample text that I'm going to put into the system, some sample text in Spanish. So I'm going to switch my language picker to so that it reflects that the translation direction we're following is Spanish to English. And then I'm going to click Translate with Context. What happens here is that the system is first, the JavaScript is creating a vector using that Gina embedding v3 model. It's creating a vector of this source text. It's then comparing the vector of the source text with the vectors that are already stored in the system for the corpus items that we have so that it can identify similar content to pass to translation. For the similar content that's identified, what happens is that once a vector has been identified from the corpus that's similar, the system locates the corresponding text, and that corresponding text is passed as part of the prompt to the DeepSeek model that we've got connected through an API to do the translation. So we can see here the context sources used that are being passed to DeepSeek as text to inform translation. And then the DeepSeek model does the translation, and the translation outputs here, where we're getting the English text, we're getting some translation notes about what was the decision making, if we want to call it decision making, since it's a large language model doing the generation here. But here's our translation notes along with our translation. Some important things to note about the functionality that we have here. Again, this is all client side. So there's really no communication that's happening with a server. We're having all of our vectors stored within the browser when a user visits the site. They're stored in the cache for the page. Right now we have very small corpora in Spanish and English, and so storing the content in the browser, it's no problem at this point. And actually for version 1 of the software, it was really an excellent solution because what I wanted to build for version 1 was a very lightweight auto translator that participants in a workshop I was teaching could easily implement themselves. And so by the end of the 2-week workshop, there were 3 or 4 additional auto translators that were essentially duplicates of this system with someone else's information plugged in. So Participants selected their own domain for their system, built a very small corpus or corpora in the two languages of the project, and then plugged it all in. It was a plug and play. Another issue of this first version is that when we click this Translate with Context button, or maybe even before, maybe when the page loads itself, actually when the page loads itself, we're hosting on GitHub pages and everything's happening on the client side. So our API keys, like GitHub Pages needs the API keys to connect us with the Gina embedding model that we're using, and also the DeepSeek model that we're using for translation. And so uh, when the system gets initialized within the browser, an api-config.js file is also created that contains our API keys. That is, the system exposes our API keys. That's something that we're going to work on addressing in the second version of this software.